In the year 330 BC, a Macedonian soldier walked into a room in the city of Persepolis and found something that stopped him cold. It wasn't treasure. It wasn't armor. It was a pile of documents, administrative records, commercial contracts, diplomatic letters written in dozens of different languages. And in that moment, that soldier, who probably couldn't read most of those documents, was standing at the center of the largest archive the world had ever seen, the archive of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the richest, most vast, and most sophisticated empire that had ever existed in the history of humanity up to that point. And within a matter of weeks, all of it would burn, not by accident, by decision. Alexander the Great ordered Persepolis burned, and with that fire, he didn't just destroy a city. He destroyed the memory of a system of power that had taken 200 years to build, and that we still brutally underestimate to this day. Before we go further, if this kind of content excites you, if you love understanding history from the inside rather than from the summaries they taught you in school, subscribe right now and hit the bell. And leave me one thing in the comments. Did you know the Persian Empire was larger than the Roman Empire at its peak? Yes or no? I want to know how many of you already knew that, and how many are finding out right now. Alright, let's go back to the beginning. To understand the fall of the Persian Empire, you first have to understand what it actually was. And what it was is almost incomprehensible from our modern perspective, because we have no real point of comparison. It is not an exaggeration to say that the Achaemenid Empire was the most ambitious political project humanity had ever attempted up to that moment in history. At its peak, under the reign of Darius I in the late 6th century BC, the Persian Empire controlled a territory stretching from present-day Pakistan and parts of India in the east to Libya and northern Greece in the west, from the Caspian Sea in the north to the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea in the south. We're talking about approximately 8 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that is more than double the size of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent, and they governed it not with the iron fist we imagine when we think of ancient empires, but with an administrative system of a sophistication that would not be seen again in that region of the world for centuries. That is the first thing you have to understand about Persia. It was not simply an empire of brutal conquest. It was an empire of administration. The Persians had something very few empires of antiquity developed with such depth: the capacity to govern completely different peoples without destroying what made them different. The system of satrapies, the administrative provinces that Darius I organized with an almost modern precision, divided the empire into 20 regions, each governed by a satrap who answered directly to the king, but had broad autonomy to manage his territory according to local customs. The Persians did not impose their language. They did not impose their religion. They did not force conquered peoples to adopt Persian culture. On the contrary, when Cyrus the Great, the dynasty's founder, conquered Babylon in 539 BC, he entered the city and declared the freedom of all peoples deported by the Babylonians, including the Jews, who had spent decades in captivity. That decree, engraved on what we know today as the Cyrus Cylinder, is considered by many historians to be the first human rights document in history. Think about that for a moment. The first formal recognition that conquered peoples have rights, that they can practice their religion, that they can return to their lands, that they are not the property of the conqueror. That didn't come from Greece. It didn't come from Rome. It came from Persia, 2,500 years ago. And here I want to pause for something I think connects directly to what we're exploring. If the way the Persian Empire built its wealth, how it designed its tribute systems, how it protected trade across entire continents, how it sustained for 2 centuries the most expensive civilization of antiquity, sparks your curiosity, there's an e-book in the description of this video written exactly for that. It's called The Secrets of Wealth of Ancient Civilizations. It's not self-help dressed up as history. It's a real, documented analysis of how civilizations like the Persian, Babylonian, Egyptian, and Roman generated and accumulated wealth using principles that remain brutally relevant today. It costs just 10 euros. You can read it from your phone tonight, and by purchasing it, you directly support this channel, so we can keep bringing you real history. No filters, no simplifications. The link is in the description. Check it out. Let's continue. The wealth of the Persian Empire was something contemporaries described with a mixture of admiration and terror. The The royal treasury of Persepolis, when Alexander captured it, contained, according to ancient sources, approximately 120,000 talents of silver. To understand that number, 1 talent of silver was enough to pay a Greek soldier's monthly salary for several months. 120,000 talents was more money than existed in all of Greece combined at that moment. It was an accumulation of wealth without precedent in Western history. Where did all that money come from? From a tax system that Darius I designed with a precision that modern economists still study with respect. Each satrapy paid a fixed annual tribute to the royal treasury, calculated according to the estimated productivity of its territory. But that tribute was not collected haphazardly. There was a complete bureaucratic apparatus, accountants, royal inspectors, and a communications system that connected all 20 satrapies to the capital through the royal road. A paved road network more than 2,000 kilometers long that allowed royal messengers to cross the entire empire in a matter of days. The most advanced postal system in the ancient world, 400 years before Rome built its famous roads. Commerce was the other great source of wealth. The Persian Empire contained within its territory the main trade routes between the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, Central Asia, and India. It simultaneously controlled the ports of the Aegean Sea and the Persian Gulf. It held an effective monopoly over the routes along which silk, spices, ivory, lapis lazuli, tin, copper, and dozens of other materials the ancient world depended on traveled. And the Persians didn't just tax that commerce, they actively participated in it. The royal merchants, the officials who administered the satrapies, the generals who controlled the ports, all had their own commercial interests intertwined with those of the state in a way that made it nearly impossible to separate political power from economic power. It was, in many respects, the first great example of what we would call today a state capitalist system, a system where government and commerce are not opposing forces, but structural allies. So why did it fall? That is the question that seems simple and turns out to be extraordinarily complex when you study it seriously. The popular narrative says it fell because Alexander the Great was an unparalleled military genius, and because the Persian king Darius III was a coward who fled from battle. That narrative is convenient, it is dramatic, and it is fundamentally incomplete. Hey, before we go on, I need to ask you something. Tell me in the comments what surprises you most about the Persian Empire so far. The Cyrus Cylinder as the first human rights document, the road system that anticipated Rome by 4 centuries, the amount of wealth Alexander found in Persepolis. I want to read your responses. And if you know someone who's passionate about ancient history, share this video with them. Those comments and shares are the fuel that keeps this channel going. Back to the fall. Darius III was not a coward. He was a man who had come to the throne under extremely difficult circumstances, who had demonstrated personal courage in earlier battles, and who faced Alexander with a numerically far superior army in both decisive battles, Issus and Gaugamela. The problem wasn't the size of the Persian army. The problem was its structure. The Persian army in the 4th century BC was a coalition army. Soldiers from dozens of different peoples, with different weapons, different combat traditions, different languages, with loyalties that in many cases ran more toward their own local leaders than toward the King of Kings in Persepolis. Coordinating it on the battlefield was an enormously complex logistical task, and Alexander, with his perfectly coordinated Macedonian phalanx and his heavy companion cavalry, exploited exactly that weakness with a precision that military historians still study as a model of tactical genius. But there is something deeper than military tactics, something that very few analyses of the Persian collapse mention with the honesty it deserves. The Achaemenid Empire had been weakening from within for decades by the time Alexander crossed the Hellespont in 334 BC. The dynasty's later kings had progressively lost effective control over the more distant satrapies. The satraps, who were originally loyal officials appointed by the king, had begun behaving like independent rulers in their territories. There had been multiple satrapal rebellions during the 4th century, some of them quietly supported by Greek city-states that saw Persian weakness as a commercial and political opportunity. The royal treasury, which under Darius I had been filled with almost obsessive discipline, had begun to empty under later kings who used the accumulated wealth not to reinvest it in maintaining the system, but to finance internal wars, succession struggles, and the expenses of a court that had grown progressively larger, more costly, and more disconnected from the reality of the provinces that sustained it. This is something that repeats throughout the history of great empires, with a disturbing regularity. The moment when a system's elite begins to extract more than the system can produce without reinvesting in its maintenance is the moment when collapse becomes inevitable. Not immediate, not yet visible, but inevitable, like a structure with a crack in its foundation that can remain standing for years, even decades, until the right weight arrives at the right moment and everything gives way at once. Alexander was that weight, at the right moment. What he found when he entered Persepolis in 330 BC was not just wealth. It was a system that had stopped regenerating itself. Officials who collected tributes, but no longer reinvested them in the infrastructure that made those tributes possible. Roads that had fallen into disrepair, irrigation canals that had deteriorated, ports that had lost the commercial traffic that made them profitable. The exterior of the Persian Empire was still impressive. The facades of Persepolis, with their reliefs of tribute delegations from every corner of the known world, were still the most magnificent thing a visitor could see in the ancient world. But on the inside, the system had become hollow. And then Alexander burned Persepolis. There is a historical debate about whether that decision was strategic, a symbolic message that Achaemenid power had definitively ended, or whether it was an act of collective drunkenness, as some ancient sources suggest, describing a party that ended in fire. It was probably both things at once. History rarely has a single cause. What is beyond dispute is the result. In the span of 3 years, between 334 and 330 BC, the richest and most extensive empire the world had ever known ceased to exist. Not gradually, not in fragmented fashion, like Mesopotamia centuries later, all at once, with a speed that left the very contemporaries who witnessed it stunned. That is the real lesson of the fall of the Persian Empire. It is not a lesson about military strategy. It is a lesson about what sustains systems of power over time. And the answer is not wealth, though that helps. It is not size, though that matters. It is legitimacy, the perception that the system serves those who sustain it, and not only those who direct it. When that perception disappears, collapse is only a matter of time, and of finding the right Macedonian at the right moment. If you want to understand in greater depth how these civilizations built their wealth systems and what principles they used to sustain themselves for centuries, the ebook in the description, The Secrets of Wealth of Ancient Civilizations, is exactly that. €10. Tonight on your phone. A real analysis of the economic systems that moved the ancient world and that still have things to teach us. The link is below. And I'll see you in the next video.